Good morning, everyone. Last week, the chief of staff of the IDF, Aviv Kochavi, retired after 40 years of military service. And he authored a book called Acharecha, which means after you, which is the motto of the Israeli army, that the generals go up front and they say, after me, Acharai. And in his book, he talks about the most important human need. And he says the most important human need is recognition. And he brings the very first story in the Torah, where Cain murders his brother Abel. Cain kills Hevel. And what was the reason why Cain killed his brother? Because Abel, brought an offering to God as well as Cain, and God accepted the offering of Abel and not Cain. And this infuriated Cain so much that he murdered his brother. And what he points out is that what did Cain want? He wanted recognition. And General Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi said that throughout his military career, he always tried to show and give recognition to his soldiers. He said he would often take the time to write personal notes to thank soldiers for operations. And he says many times he would come into their bunkers or their tanks and see these little notes hanging on the walls, notes of recognition. He said when he sent out a troop on a field operation, he would wait for them and greet them as they came back to recognize them and appreciate them. And he said sometimes recognition could just be with a glance of an eye. In this week's Torah portion, we come to the last three plagues. And the second to last plague is the plague of darkness. And what does the Torah say? One man did not see his fellow man. And our rabbis say this is not just literally darkness, which is the reversal of creation where God said, let there be light. And Egypt had destroyed God's natural order through their evil, and God was now removing the light that he created. But it's also a metaphor that one of the greatest plagues is when one man does not see his brother, when we cannot see each other, when we do not recognize or appreciate one another. You know, last year I was here as well on yeshiva vacation. This is the week when our kids have off from yeshiva and we come out here to go skiing. I remember last January, it's always the last week in January, it was when Vladimir Putin was amassing 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. And I remember giving a Dvar Torah from here with the snow in the background saying, what will happen? Will he invade Ukraine? Well, here we are a year later, and we know the answer. He invaded Ukraine, and there's been so much death and destruction and tragedy. But you know what the greatest tragedy is? That in the beginning of the war, that's all we talked about. The plight of the Ukrainians. That's all the news talked about, all the media talked about. Now you hardly hear people talking about it. It's hardly in the news, because we've become desensitized. And now we don't even see the plight of one another. We have the plague of darkness that we become apathetic. And we stop caring and seeing one another. When I was telling someone I was going skiing with the family, they said, oh, that's the greatest mountain. You know, for skiing, I said the greatest mountain are the two greatest mountains. One is Mount Sinai, where the Torah was given, and one is Mount Moriah, where the Holy Temple was built. And both of them have to do with recognition. It says that all the mountains wanted that the Torah should be given on them. And God chose Mount Sinai because it was the humblest of all mountains. God said, I'm going to recognize. I see you. You may think you're a small mountain, but I see you. I recognize you. And of course, Mount Moriah, God chose to build a temple there because the rabbis tell us there were two brothers who lived on two sides of the hill. One had 10 children, one had no children. And each one was worried about the other. The one with the 10 children said, who's going to support my brother? So every night he would go over the hill and put grain in his brother's barn. And the one with no children said he has to feed 10 children, so he would go over the hill and put grain in his brother's barn. And one night as they were both climbing up the hill, they saw each other and they embraced one another. And God said, this is where I'm going to build a temple. The greatest gift, the greatest blessing is when we could see one another and recognize and appreciate each other. There's a story told about this boy who's going home from high school one day, and he sees one of his classmates walking home with all his books. And he's wondering, why is he carrying all his books home? Then he sees some other kids come and push him on the ground and start laughing at him. And he comes over to help him, and he finds his glasses for him, and he lifts him up, and he starts talking to him. He says, what's your name? He says, my name is Kyle. And he walks him home, and he says, what are you doing tomorrow? He says, nothing. He says, come play football with me with my friends. And they start a friendship that lasted for 4 years throughout high school. This kid, Kyle, was a very bright kid. He was chosen to be the valedictorian at the end of 12th grade. When he got up to speak at his graduation, he told the following story. He said, the first week of high school, I was in a new school. Kids were bullying me. They were making fun of me. And after a while, I said, I don't want to live anymore. So one Friday, I packed up my lockers, took all my books, and I carried it home thinking, I'm going to end my life, and I won't have my mother have to go back to school to collect my books. That afternoon, a bunch of kids bullied me. They threw me to the ground, and they mocked me. But then one kid came over to me, and he looked to that one kid in the crowd, and he said, you befriended me and became my best friend for the next 4 years, and you literally saved my life. We have to live in light. It doesn't just mean physical light. It means the light of recognition, appreciation, and acknowledging one another. Have a wonderful day.